Every year, across 4 months of soft, continuous, unhurried rain, the Indian monsoon delivers more fresh water to the surface of this earth than the Amazon River, the largest river system on the planet, carrying 1/5 of all the fresh water that flows in all the world's rivers combined, carries in 4 full years. Let that settle for a moment, not as a number to be calculated or compared or fully comprehended, but simply as a feeling. The feeling of something vast and patient and completely reliable, doing its ancient work in the same quiet way it has done its ancient work for 50 million years, through every summer that has ever fallen on the Indian subcontinent, through every civilization that has ever organized itself around the expectation of its arrival, through every night that has ever been made softer and quieter by the sound of rain falling on warm earth in the dark. Tonight, we are going to follow that rain, not quickly and not with any urgency at all, but in the slow and deeply unhurried way of a mind that has set down everything it was carrying through the day and is now simply allowing itself to be present to something ancient and beautiful and completely indifferent to the pace of any individual human life. The monsoon, arriving as it always arrives, patient and enormous and entirely reliable. The way everything truly old and truly natural is patient and enormous and entirely reliable. You do not need to stay awake for this journey. The monsoon has been arriving for 50 million years, and it will arrive again long after tonight. And right now it is asking nothing of you except exactly this: to rest, to breathe slowly, and to allow the oldest rainfall on earth to carry you gently into the dark. There is a particular quality of air that exists only in the hours before the monsoon breaks, a quality that anyone who has ever lived through a tropical summer or spent time in the landscape of the subcontinent in late May or early June will recognize not as a thought or an observation, but as a physical sensation, a message delivered directly to the body, through the skin and the lungs, and the particular way the atmosphere presses against every exposed surface, with a weight and a warmth and a stillness that is unlike the stillness of any other time of year. The land has been dry for months by the time the monsoon arrives, and that dryness carries its own particular atmosphere, a heat that sits in the air not as a breeze or a current but as a presence, a dense and heavy warmth that has absorbed itself into every surface it has touched across the long weeks of the pre-monsoon season. The soil baked to a pale and dusty hardness, the leaves on the trees carrying a particular brittleness at their edges, the whole landscape holding itself in a state of deep and patient waiting that seems to belong not just to the plants and the animals and the people moving through it, but to the air itself, which has grown still in a way that feels less like calm and more like anticipation. This waiting has a sound, and the sound is a particular kind of silence, not the silence of an empty or an undisturbed place, but the silence of a landscape that has temporarily reduced its own biological activity in response to the heat, the birds quieter than they would be in a cooler season, the insects operating at a lower register, the whole sonic environment of the landscape somehow compressed and flattened by the weight of the dry heat pressing down from a sky that is white rather than blue in the middle of the day. The moisture that would give the sky its color having been drawn upward and held in the atmosphere in that particular pre-monsoon way, visible not as cloud, but as a faint, flat, luminous haze that sits between the earth and the sun and gives the light a quality of diffusion without any of the relief that actual cloud cover would provide. And then something changes in that air, not all at once, not in any sudden or dramatic way that announces itself clearly to anyone who is not paying close attention, but gradually, across the hours of a late June afternoon, a shift in the quality of the atmosphere that the body registers before the mind does, a slight cooling at the very edges of the breeze, a darkening of the horizon in a direction from which no ordinary afternoon cloud has been coming for months. A smell in the air that is entirely new and entirely familiar at the same time, carrying within it the promise of something the landscape has been waiting for, with a patience that now, in these last hours before the rain arrives, is almost palpable. The temperature drops, not dramatically, not in the way of a cold front sweeping through a temperate landscape, but in the soft and almost tentative way of air that is beginning to remember what moisture feels like. The humidity rising ahead of the rain as the leading edge of the monsoon circulation reaches the landscape before the rain itself does. And this rising humidity, pressing against skin that has been accustomed for weeks to air as dry and as direct as the heat itself, feels like the first easing of a pressure that had become so constant it had ceased to register as pressure at all. The land is waiting, the air is waiting, and somewhere above the darkening horizon, moving at a pace measured not in the urgent minutes of an approaching thunderstorm, but in the slow and patient hours of a planetary weather system covering thousands of kilometers, the rain is coming. Before the first drop falls, before the rain has reached the ground at all, something happens that has been happening every monsoon season for as long as there have been organisms in the soil to make it happen. A chemical signal is released into the air, carried ahead of the rain on the shifting breeze, reaching the nose of everything alive in the landscape and triggering in the nervous system of every creature that receives it. A response so old and so deeply embedded in the biology of land animals that it operates below the threshold of any conscious decision, arriving not as a thought but as a feeling, a physical and immediate recognition of something the body has been waiting for. The smell is called petrichor, a word coined in 1964 by two Australian mineralogists, Isabel Joybert and Richard Thomas, who combined the Greek word for stone with the word for the fluid that flows in the veins of the gods, because the smell they were describing seemed to them to carry exactly that quality of something essential and ancient emerging from something solid and permanent. And it is produced primarily by a chemical compound called geosmin, which is synthesized by certain species of bacteria belonging to the genus Streptomyces that live in the upper layers of soil in almost every landscape on Earth, from tropical rainforest floors to temperate garden beds to the dry, pale, baked soil of the pre-monsoon Indian landscape. These bacteria produce geosmin continuously throughout their lives, but under the dry conditions of the pre-monsoon season, when the soil has been without significant moisture for weeks or months, the geosmin remains trapped in the soil, held within the dried organic matter and the clay particles and the microscopic architecture of the soil itself, present but contained, waiting for the physical event that will release it into the air where any nose within range can receive it. That event is the first drop of rain. When a raindrop strikes dry soil at the particular speed of falling rain, it traps a tiny bubble of air within the soil surface, and that bubble, compressed by the force of the drop and then released as the drop spreads outward, shoots upward through the air in a microscopically fine spray of soil particles and organic compounds, a process called aerosol ejection that was first documented by high-speed photography in the 1960s, and that produces, in the moments after each raindrop strikes dry earth, a tiny and invisible cloud of the soil's own chemistry rising into the air above the impact point. Geosmin is among the most volatile and most abundant of the compounds carried upward in this aerosol, and it is also among the most detectable by the human nose. We can smell geosmin at concentrations as low as 5 parts per trillion, which makes our sensitivity to this particular compound among the highest of any substance the human olfactory system is capable of detecting. a sensitivity so extreme and so specifically tuned to geosmin that it has led researchers to conclude that this is not an accidental feature of human biology, but a selected one, that the ability to detect the smell of rain on dry earth at a great distance and at an extraordinarily low concentration was, for the vast majority of human evolutionary history, a genuinely important survival capability. Water is life, and the ability to smell water arriving from a distance, to know, before the rain reached you, that rain was coming, and to know it with the specificity and the certainty that a chemical signal evolved for exactly this purpose provides, was, in the landscapes where the human nervous system was shaped across millions of years of evolutionary time, the kind of advantage that compounded across generations into the deep, automatic, precognitive response that geosmin still produces in the human body today. Which is why, when the first drops of monsoon rain release their aerosol of geosmin into the air above the waiting landscape and that smells reaches you, wherever you are, whatever your relationship to the monsoon landscape might be, your nervous system responds not with analysis or evaluation, but with something much older and much more immediate than either of those things. A response that can only be described as recognition, the recognition of something that has always meant safety and water and relief, carried in a single molecule from the soil to the air, to the nose, to the oldest and most fundamental layers of the brain, that process the signals the body receives about the world it is moving through. The smell of rain on dry earth is one of the oldest safety signals in human biology, and it is arriving now, ahead of the first drop, carried on the cooling air of the monsoon's approach, reaching everything that breathes in this landscape and telling it, in the language older than any spoken word, that the waiting is nearly over, and then the rain arrives. Not all at once. Monsoon rain rarely begins all at once, despite the drama that the word monsoon sometimes implies to ears that have not experienced it directly. But in the tentative and exploratory way of the first drops of any significant rainfall, single large drops falling at intervals, each one leaving a dark circle on the pale dust of the dry soil that spreads and is absorbed and disappears before the next drop arrives nearby. The drops widely spaced at first, and each one carrying within it, as it strikes whatever surface it encounters, a sound whose particular character is determined entirely by the nature of that surface and the relationship between the drop's mass and momentum and the physical properties of what it lands on. On dry soil, the first drops of monsoon rain produce a sound that is at once soft and definite, a brief and earthy impact without any of the ringing or resonance that harder surfaces produce. The sound absorbed almost immediately by the porous and dusty surface of the earth, leaving behind a smell more than a sound. The geosmin released in that first aerosol burst the more lasting sensory record of the drop's arrival than the sound of the impact itself, which is over before the ear has quite registered it. On the broad, dark, waxy surface of a tropical leaf, the large, horizontal leaves of the plants that crowd the understory of a monsoon forest, leaves that have grown wide and flat and specifically oriented to catch as much of the seasonal rainfall as possible. The first drops produce something entirely different, a resonant and slightly hollow sound, the leaf itself vibrating briefly in response to the impact and amplifying the sound of the drop into something the ear can receive with more clarity and more pleasure. The particular frequency of that resonance, determined by the size and thickness and tension of the leaf, every leaf slightly different in its acoustic response, so that a forest receiving its first monsoon rain produces, from the leaf surfaces alone, a layered and complex and entirely irregular pattern of sound, whose individual elements are each too brief and too specific to constitute a melody, but whose collective effect is something the human, auditory system receives as deeply and immediately beautiful. And on water, on the surface of a pond or a river or a puddle formed by the drops that have already fallen, each new raindrop produces the most visually and acoustically complex response of all. The impact creating a circular ripple that spreads outward from the point of contact, while simultaneously projecting a tiny column of water upward from the center. A column that separates into a single droplet and falls back into the spreading ripple in a sequence of concentric rings that overlap with the rings produced by every other drop, falling within the same field of water, so that the surface of any body of water in a monsoon rain becomes, within moments of the rain's arrival, a continuously moving and overlapping pattern of circles and interference patterns whose visual complexity is matched by the acoustic complexity of the soft and overlapping impacts that produce it. As the rain intensifies, as the widely spaced first drops are joined by more drops and then more still, the intervals between impacts shortening until they overlap into a continuous sound rather than a series of distinct events. The acoustic character of the rainfall transforms into something that researchers studying the neuroscience of auditory relaxation have identified as one of the most reliably calming sound environments the natural world produces. The sound of steady rain belongs to a category of acoustic phenomena called pink noise, or 1/f noise, a term from signal processing that describes a specific relationship between a sound's frequency and its intensity, a relationship in which the energy of the sound decreases proportionally as frequency increases, producing a spectrum of sound that is neither the flat, featureless hiss of white noise nor the rumbling, low-frequency dominance of brown noise, but something in between, a balanced and continuously varying acoustic texture that the human auditory system receives as simultaneously stimulating enough to engage its attention and regular enough to require none. The reason this particular frequency relationship produces relaxation in the human brain is related to the fact that the brain itself, during states of rest and early sleep, tends to produce electrical activity whose frequency characteristics mirror those of pink noise. The slow waves of relaxed wakefulness and the even slower waves of light sleep exhibiting the same 1/f relationship between frequency and amplitude that characterizes the sound of rainfall, so that the sound of rain on the ear and the activity of the resting brain are, in a measurable neurological sense, speaking the same language, each one reinforcing in the other the particular state that both are expressing. The rain is speaking to your brain in the language your brain uses when it is ready to rest, and your brain, receiving this ancient and deeply familiar signal, knows exactly what to do with it. In the minutes and hours after the monsoon rain begins, after the petrichor has reached the nose and the pink noise of the steady rainfall has reached the ears and the cooler, moister air of the monsoon has reached the skin, something begins to happen in the body that has nothing to do with any decision or intention on the part of the person experiencing it. Something that happens automatically and completely, and with a thoroughness that reflects the deep evolutionary age of the response being triggered. The parasympathetic nervous system begins to take precedence over the sympathetic nervous system in the slow and unmeasured way that this shift always occurs when the environment is delivering the signals that, for the vast majority of human evolutionary history, have meant safety. The signals that told the body it could stop scanning the horizon for threats, stop maintaining the elevated alertness and elevated heart rate and elevated cortisol levels that the sympathetic nervous system maintains in any environment that has not yet been confirmed as safe, and begin the process of rest and restoration that the body cannot perform while the sympathetic system is dominant, and that it performs with extraordinary efficiency and thoroughness the moment conditions allow. The heart rate slows, not dramatically, not in any way that produces a conscious awareness of the change, but measurably, the resting heart rate declining by several beats per minute as the parasympathetic system reduces the demands it is placing on the cardiovascular system, the blood pressure easing slightly with it, the whole cardiovascular system finding a lower and more economical operating point that the body sustains for as long as the environmental signals continue to tell it that the lower point is appropriate. The muscles that have been carrying the accumulated tension of the day, the particular habitual tightness in the shoulders and the jaw and the muscles surrounding the eyes that builds across the hours of ordinary waking life, and that most people carry into the evening without being consciously aware of how much of it they are still holding, begin very slowly and without any instruction to release that tension in small and almost imperceptible increments, the parasympathetic system withdrawing the low-level activation that was maintaining it, and allowing the muscles to settle toward a resting length that is longer and looser and quieter than the length they have been holding through the day. The breath slows and deepens, the diaphragm dropping further with each inhalation and rising more slowly with each exhalation. The breath finding its own natural rhythm rather than the slightly faster and slightly shallower rhythm that the demands of the day impose. And this slowing and deepening of the breath creates a feedback loop with the cardiovascular and nervous systems that reinforces and extends the parasympathetic shift, each slow breath signaling to the brain that the conditions for rest are continuing, each slow breath receiving in return the continued withdrawal of sympathetic activation that allows the next breath to be equally slow and equally deep. And in the space created by this slowing, in the physical and mental quiet that the parasympathetic shift produces as it gently clears the accumulated noise of the day from the body and the mind, the mental activity that has been running through the waking hours, the thoughts and concerns and replayed conversations and anticipated obligations that constitute the ordinary background noise of a conscious mind moving through its day, begins to lose its urgency, its threads thinning and separating and drifting apart from one another in the way that thoughts always begin to drift when the conditions for sleep are assembling themselves in the body that contains them. The rain is still falling outside. It will be falling for a long time yet. The monsoon does not hurry, and a single monsoon rain event can last for hours or days. The system that drives it operating on the scale of a continent and an ocean and a seasonal shift in the entire atmospheric circulation of the tropics. A system too large and too patient to be hurried by any local condition or any individual night's passage. And your body, receiving the rain's patient signals through the skin and the ears and the lungs and the ancient, precognitive layers of the nervous system that were shaped by millions of years in landscapes where rain meant safety and water and the relief of heat. Your body knows exactly what the rain is, telling it, and is responding exactly as it has always responded, in the slow and complete and entirely automatic way of something that has been doing this for as long as there has been rain and bodies capable of receiving it, which is, in the only terms that matter right now, a very long time. Simply the rain, simply the sound of it falling on the leaves and the earth and the water outside, in the dark, in the cool, in the patient and ancient and entirely unhurried way of the monsoon, doing what the monsoon has always done, and simply you resting here in the warmth of wherever you are resting tonight, while the largest movement of water on the surface of this earth continues its 50 million year work outside, indifferent to the hour and indifferent to anything except the ancient and reliable chemistry of warm land and warm ocean, and the slow turn of the seasons that hasn't been producing this same rain. In this same season, with this same patient abundance, for longer than any mind alive tonight could hold clearly even if it tried. Rest here. The rain is still coming. It always comes. We have been resting here. In the first rain, in the petrichor and the pink noise, and the slow parasympathetic settling of a body that has received the signal it has been waiting for through the long dry hours of the day. And now, before the rain carries us any deeper into the quiet, there is something worth understanding about where all of this water comes from, and why it arrives when it arrives, and why the monsoon is not simply a season of rain in the way that the word season might suggest to ears accustomed to the four-season rhythm of the temperate world, but something far larger and far more architecturally extraordinary than any ordinary weather pattern. A planetary machine, driven by the most fundamental forces of atmospheric physics, that has been assembling itself each year from the raw materials of ocean temperature and continental heat, and the slow rotation of the Earth beneath its own atmosphere, running the same ancient program in the same ancient way, with the same ancient reliability for 50 million years. Let that number rest somewhere comfortable in the mind before we go any further. 50 million years. The monsoon that is falling outside your window tonight, or that you are imagining falling in the warm dark beyond these words, is not a weather system that appeared recently, or that exists by any kind of coincidence. It is among the oldest continuously operating large-scale atmospheric phenomena on the surface of this planet, a system whose origins are bound up with one of the most dramatic geological events in the history of the Earth's surface. An event so slow that it unfolded across tens of millions of years, and yet so consequential that it permanently reorganized the atmospheric circulation of an entire hemisphere and created, in the process, the seasonal rainfall pattern that has sustained billions of human lives across the centuries of recorded history. But we will reach that geological story in a later chapter. And for now, for this particular quiet hour of the night, it is enough to simply follow the monsoon's annual birth, to trace the specific sequence of physical events that transforms the stillness and the heat of the pre-monsoon season into the vast and patient rainfall of the monsoon months, moving through each stage of that transformation slowly and without any urgency. The way the monsoon itself moves through each stage slowly and without any urgency. The way everything operating at the scale of a continent and an ocean moves through its stages. The story begins with the sun, not with any particular day or any dramatic astronomical event, but with the slow and continuous northward drift of the sun's most direct rays across the surface of the Earth in the weeks following the March equinox. The gradual shift in the angle at which sunlight strikes the northern hemisphere as the Earth moves through the portion of its orbit that tilts the northern hemisphere progressively toward the sun. A shift so gradual that on any individual day in March or April, it is barely perceptible, but that accumulates across the weeks of spring into a significant and consequential change in the amount of solar energy being delivered to the land surface of the Asian continent. The land warms faster than the ocean. This single fact, so simple that it can be stated in 5 words, so consequential that the entire structure of the monsoon follows from it, is the thermodynamic engine at the heart of the monsoon circulation, the physical asymmetry between land and water that generates the pressure difference that drives the wind that carries the moisture that falls as rain across the subcontinent. For 4 months of every year, land warms faster than ocean because water has a much higher specific heat capacity than soil or rock, which means that it requires approximately 5 times more energy to raise the temperature of a given mass of water by 1 degree than to raise the temperature of the same mass of dry land by the same amount. And this difference in thermal capacity produces, across across the weeks and months of the Asian spring, a growing temperature contrast between the rapidly warming interior of the Indian subcontinent and the much more slowly warming surface of the Indian Ocean to its south. By May, this contrast has become substantial. The interior of the subcontinent, particularly the Thar Desert of Rajasthan and the dry plains of central India, may be reaching surface temperatures of 45 or even 50 degrees Celsius in the afternoon, while the surface of the Indian Ocean remains considerably cooler, somewhere in the range of 28 to 30 degrees in the areas most relevant to the monsoon circulation. And this difference in surface temperature produces a corresponding difference in the temperature and density of the air above each surface. Hot air is less dense than cool air, and less dense air exerts less pressure on the surface below it, which means that the intensely heated land surface of the Indian subcontinent in May generates a region of genuinely low atmospheric pressure above it. Not marginally lower pressure, but substantially lower pressure, a thermal low that deepens and intensifies as the surface heating intensifies through the weeks of the pre-monsoon season. The air column above the hot land literally thinning as the heat causes it to expand and rise, creating at the surface a pressure deficit that the atmosphere, following the same physics that causes air to rush from high pressure to low pressure in any situation, must eventually fill. And the air that fills it comes from the ocean. From the vast, warm, evaporating surface of the Indian Ocean to the south, where the sun has been warming the water through the winter and spring months, and the water has been responding by evaporating, releasing water vapor into the atmosphere at a rate determined by the temperature of the surface and the dryness of the air above it, loading the oceanic atmosphere with moisture in the patient and continuous way that evaporation operates, gram by gram, molecule by molecule, building through the months of preparation into a reservoir of atmospheric moisture, whose total content, when the monsoon circulation finally carries it northward over the subcontinent, will be sufficient to maintain substantial rainfall across millions of square kilometers for 4 months. This moisture-laden air, sitting above the warm Indian Ocean in the weeks before the monsoon breaks, is already moving, drawn northward by the pressure gradient between the low-pressure thermal low over the hot subcontinent and the higher pressure region over the cooler ocean, the flow beginning tentatively in late May and accelerating through early June as the pressure gradient deepens and the Coriolis effect, the deflection of moving air caused by the Earth's rotation beneath it, curves the northward flow into the characteristic southwest to northeast direction that gives the monsoon its defining geographical character. The winds arriving over the subcontinent from the southwest, carrying their enormous load of oceanic moisture inland toward the ranges and the plains that will receive it as rain. The monsoon arrives at the southwestern tip of India, at the coast of Kerala, green and warm, and receiving the first rain of the season in a moment that the entire country watches and celebrates and anticipates with a collective attention that reflects the depth of the monsoon's significance in the life of the subcontinent. On average around the 1st of June, though the date varies from year to year depending on the strength and the timing of the pressure gradient that drives the circulation, and weather forecasters in India track the approach of the monsoon onset with a precision and an intensity that reflects the fact that this single meteorological event is, in economic and agricultural terms, the most consequential annual weather event in the lives of more than 1 billion people. The date of June 1st, give or take a week in either direction depending on the year, is perhaps the most anticipated date in the meteorological calendar of any country on Earth, a date whose arrival has been tracked and recorded and celebrated for centuries, whose early or late arrival has determined the abundance or scarcity of harvests across the subcontinent through all the generations of agricultural civilization that have organized themselves around the monsoon's rhythm, and whose announcement by the Indian Meteorological Department is received each year with the particular mixture of relief and anticipation, and deep, culturally embedded, meaning that only a weather event with 50 million years of history and centuries of human significance can generate. The monsoon that arrives at Kerala on that first day of June is not a single stream of wind and rain, but rather the arrival of a vast and complex atmospheric circulation that involves two distinct branches, each one approaching the subcontinent from a different direction and delivering its moisture to a different geographical region. The two branches together, covering the subcontinent in a progression that takes approximately 6 weeks from the first landfall at Kerala to the final arrival of the monsoon at the northwestern corner of India. The Arabian Sea branch is the first and the stronger of the two, the southwest monsoon current that crosses the Arabian Sea from west to east and strikes the Western Ghats, the chain of low mountains running parallel to India's western coast, with sufficient force and sufficient moisture to produce some of the heaviest rainfall anywhere on Earth in the coastal and hill stations of Kerala and Karnataka and Maharashtra, where the orographic lifting of the moist air against the mountain slopes forces the air upward, cooling it adiabatically and releasing its moisture as the extraordinary rainfall that makes the Western Ghats among the wettest places on the planet during the monsoon months. The Bay of Bengal branch approaches from the southeast, crossing the Bay of Bengal from south to north, and arriving at the coasts of Bangladesh and West Bengal and Odisha, curving westward as it moves inland under the influence of the Himalayas that prevent it from continuing northward and deflecting it instead across the northern plains of India in the characteristic arc that carries monsoon rainfall from the northeast to the northwest across the breadth of the Gangetic Plain, the rain following a track that has been carved by the same atmospheric dynamics across the same landscape for the same months of the same season, for as long as the current monsoon system has been operating. By mid-July, the monsoon has covered the entire subcontinent. The same thermal gradient that drove the onset of the monsoon in June continues to drive it through July and August and into September, the land remaining warmer than the ocean through the monsoon months despite the cooling effect of the rain, the pressure gradient maintaining the southwest flow that keeps the moisture-laden oceanic air moving inland, and the rain falling across the subcontinent in the steady and patient way of a system, large enough and self-sustaining enough to maintain itself through small variations in the underlying conditions. And as long as the pressure gradient holds, as long as the land remains warmer than the ocean, and the thermal low over the interior draws the oceanic air northward, the rain continues, falling each day across the subcontinent in amounts that fill the rivers and recharge the aquifers and saturate the soil and sustain the agricultural civilization that has depended on this annual delivery of water for as long as there have been agricultural civilizations on the subcontinent to depend on it. There is something extraordinarily settling about understanding the monsoon in these terms, as a thermodynamic machine driven by the simple and ancient physics of differential heating, operating reliably because the physics that drive it are as reliable as the sun and the ocean and the slow rotation of the earth itself, which is to say as reliable as anything in the natural world can be, which is to say more reliable than almost anything else we can name. The monsoon arrives because the land is warmer than the ocean. The land is warmer than the ocean because the sun has been heating it through the spring. The sun will continue heating it through the spring as long as the Earth continues its orbit, and the Earth will continue its orbit for approximately another 5 billion years. The monsoon is not going anywhere. It arrived this year, as it has arrived every year for 50 million years, drawn by the same ancient physics, following the same ancient path, delivering the same ancient rain to the same ancient landscape with the same patient and entirely unhurried abundance that it has delivered every monsoon season that has ever preceded this one. And right now, while you rest in the quiet of this night, that same ancient circulation is doing what it does. The warm, moist air rising over the heated land, the pressure drawing the oceanic air northward, the rain falling somewhere on the subcontinent in the dark, following the same atmospheric logic that the monsoon has followed for 50 million years, and that it will follow for 50 million more. Simply the physics, simply the sun and the land and the ocean and the ancient, patient, reliable machine they have been building together since before the Himalayas were tall enough to be seen. Rest here in the quiet knowledge of how the rain is made, before we follow it into the next chapter, into the ocean itself, where the water that is falling outside your window right now began its long journey months ago, evaporating grain by grain from the warm surface of the Indian Ocean, in the patient and continuous way that the monsoon prepares itself through the months before its arrival. The rain knows where it came from, and it has been making this same journey from ocean to atmosphere to cloud to rain to earth for longer than there has been anyone on this planet to watch it fall. We have been following the monsoon from its first sensory arrival. The petrichor, the cooling air, the pink noise of the rain on leaves and earth and water, through the atmospheric physics of its annual birth, the thermodynamic machine of differential heating that draws the warm oceanic air northward across the subcontinent each June with the same patient reliability that it has drawn it northward for 50 million years. And now, before we continue deeper into the quiet of this night, there is a place we need to visit that we have mentioned but not yet fully entered. A place as large as the monsoon's weather and as old as the monsoon's history, and as essential to everything that falls from the sky as the sky itself. The Indian Ocean. Not the Indian Ocean as a geographical boundary or a body of water on a map. Not the Indian Ocean as a navigational challenge or a shipping route or any of the other human frameworks that have been placed around it across the centuries of maritime history. But the Indian Ocean as the monsoon experiences it, as the source, the reservoir, the patient and vast and continuously giving origin of every drop of water that the monsoon delivers to the land, the place where the rain begins its journey months before it arrives, evaporating molecule by molecule from a surface so large that the eye, placed anywhere upon it, sees nothing but water in every direction to every horizon. The Indian Ocean covers approximately 70 million square kilometers, which makes it the third largest of the world's 5 oceans, smaller than the Pacific and the Atlantic, but larger than all the others. And it is distinguished from every other major ocean on Earth by a feature that has everything to do with the monsoon, and that makes it, in the context of the planetary water cycle, a uniquely important and uniquely productive body of water. It is the only ocean that is bounded to the north by a continental landmass large enough and warm enough to generate the pressure gradient that drives a monsoon circulation, which means that the Indian Ocean and the monsoon are not simply related, but are, in the most fundamental sense, the same system expressing itself in 2 different forms. The ocean and the atmosphere locked in the same ancient and mutual relationship that they have maintained since the monsoon first began. The journey of the monsoon rain begins not in June, when the rain arrives at the Kerala coast and the newspapers carry their annual headlines about the monsoon's onset, and not even in May, when the thermal low over the heated subcontinent is deepening and the pressure gradient that will drive the monsoon circulation is establishing itself in the atmosphere above the ocean. But months earlier, in the winter and early spring, in the quiet and largely unobserved process by which the Indian Ocean prepares the moisture that the monsoon will eventually carry northward and deposit as rain. Through December and January and February, while the Northern Hemisphere is in its winter months and the Indian subcontinent is experiencing the cool and relatively dry weather of its post-monsoon season, the Indian Ocean surface is warming, absorbing the solar radiation that the sun, now at its most direct over the Southern Hemisphere, is delivering to the tropical ocean with an intensity that the higher latitudes of the Northern Hemisphere are not receiving in these same months. The ocean accumulating this solar energy in the slow and thermally massive way of a body of water whose sheer volume means that any change in its average temperature represents an enormous accumulation of heat energy. Water's high specific heat capacity, the same property that causes the ocean to warm more slowly than the land, and that is the thermodynamic foundation of the monsoon circulation, also means that once the ocean has accumulated heat, it releases that heat slowly and maintains its temperature with a consistency and a stability that the land surface, heating and cooling rapidly with each daily cycle of sunlight and darkness, can never match. And this thermal stability of the ocean surface through the winter and early spring months means that the evaporation that the warm ocean drives, the continuous transfer of water from the liquid ocean surface into the gaseous atmosphere above it, is itself stable and consistent and accumulated across the months of preparation in a way that the atmosphere above the land cannot replicate. Evaporation from the ocean surface is not a dramatic process. It produces no sound and no visible change to the surface that is undergoing it, and the individual molecules of water that leave the ocean surface and enter the atmosphere do so invisibly, becoming part of the invisible water vapor content of the air above the ocean without any outward sign of their departure. No ripple, no reduction in the level of the ocean's surface that any instrument could detect, no change in the appearance of the water that would tell an observer watching the ocean that anything at all was happening at the molecular level of the surface they were looking at. And yet, the scale of this invisible process, when it is considered not at the molecular level, but at the level of the entire Indian Ocean operating continuously across the months of preparation, is genuinely staggering. The Indian Ocean evaporates an estimated 8 to 10 millimeters of water per day from its surface during the pre-monsoon months, which sounds like a modest number until you multiply it by 70 million square kilometers of ocean surface and arrive at a daily evaporation total that represents hundreds of cubic kilometers of water entering the atmosphere above the Indian Ocean on every single day of the pre-monsoon season. Hundreds of cubic kilometers of water every day, rising invisibly from the ocean surface and entering the atmosphere as water vapor, carried upward by the turbulence of the air above the warm water and mixed into the atmospheric column above the ocean in the invisible and unhurried way that water vapor has always mixed into the atmosphere above a warm body of water, accumulating in the atmosphere across the weeks and months of the pre-monsoon season until the atmosphere above the Indian Ocean is carrying a moisture load whose total content, expressed in terms of the depth of rainfall it would produce if it were all to fall as rain in one place at one time, would be sufficient to sustain monsoon-level rainfall across the entire Indian subcontinent for weeks. This atmospheric moisture, this invisible, distributed, patient accumulation of evaporated ocean water carried aloft in the air above the Indian Ocean, is the fuel of the monsoon in the most literal and thermodynamic sense. The energy stored not as heat but as the latent heat of vaporization that was absorbed by the ocean water when it evaporated. and that will be released back into the atmosphere as warmth when the water vapor eventually condenses into the cloud droplets and raindrops of the monsoon. The release of this latent heat being one of the mechanisms that sustains the monsoon circulation through the months of the wet season by warming the air within the monsoon cloud systems and maintaining the pressure gradient that continues to draw more moist oceanic air northward over the subcontinent. The ocean, in other words, is not simply supplying the water that falls as monsoon rain. It is supplying the energy that drives the monsoon circulation, loading the atmosphere with the latent heat that powers the weather system that delivers the rain, a contribution so fundamental to the monsoon's existence and its maintenance that the monsoon and the Indian Ocean are better understood as a single, integrated system than as separate phenomena that happen to be located near each other. The ocean feeds the sky, and the sky returns the water to the land, and the land collects it in rivers that carry it back to the ocean. A cycle so ancient and so complete and so perfectly self-sustaining that it has been running continuously for longer than the Himalayas have existed in their current form, longer than the Indian subcontinent has been in its current position relative to the equator, longer than almost any other specific, identifiable large-scale process currently operating on the surface of this planet. The specific region of the Indian Ocean most critical to the monsoon's annual formation is the Western Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea. The body of water that lies between the east coast of Africa and the Indian subcontinent, bounded to the north by the Arabian Peninsula and the coast of Pakistan, and extending southward into the open Indian Ocean, a region whose surface temperature in the weeks before the monsoon onset is one of the most carefully watched and most analytically significant variables in the entire science of monsoon prediction. When the sea surface temperature in the Western Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea in the pre-monsoon months is warmer than average, when the ocean has accumulated more solar energy than usual through the preceding winter and spring months, whether because of natural variability in the atmospheric circulation or because of the long-term warming trend that has been raising global ocean temperatures across recent decades, the evaporation from the ocean surface is more vigorous than average, and the atmosphere above the ocean carries more moisture than average. And the monsoon that eventually delivers this moisture to the subcontinent tends to be stronger and more rainfall productive than it would otherwise have been. And when the sea surface temperature is cooler than average, the evaporation is less vigorous, the atmospheric moisture loading is lower, and the monsoon that follows tends to be weaker and drier, the subcontinent receiving less rainfall than the crops and the rivers and the aquifers require, with consequences for agricultural production and water availability that cascade through the economies and the lives of billions of people with a directness and an immediacy that makes the Indian Ocean sea surface temperature in February and March one of the most economically significant measurements that any ocean observing system anywhere in the world produces. But set aside the economics and the predictions and the practical consequences of the monsoon's strength or weakness, and simply hold for a moment the underlying image, the Indian Ocean, warm and vast and continuously evaporating in the months before the monsoon, loading the atmosphere above it with the invisible water vapor that will eventually become the rain falling outside your window. The whole process unfolding at a pace and a scale that no individual observation from any single point on the ocean's surface could reveal, requiring instead the accumulated data of countless ocean buoys and satellites and research vessels and atmospheric sensors to make visible what the ocean is doing across its 70 million square kilometers of quietly evaporating surface. It is happening right now. somewhere over the warm Indian Ocean tonight. Water molecules are leaving the ocean surface and entering the atmosphere in the same invisible and patient way they have been doing since the ocean first formed in this basin, rising into the air above the water and joining the enormous, distributed, continent-spanning atmospheric river of moisture that the monsoon circulation is carrying northward toward the land, adding their small and individual contribution to a total that, aggregated across the entire surface of the ocean and the entire duration of the monsoon season, will amount to the delivery of trillions of tons of fresh water to a subcontinent that has been waiting for it since the last monsoon ended. There is something deeply comforting about this, about the knowledge that the water falling as rain on the land tonight, or that fell today, or that will fall tomorrow, has been traveling toward this moment for months, evaporating from the ocean's surface in the quiet of the pre-monsoon season, and moving northward through the atmosphere on the slow conveyor belt of the monsoon circulation, patient and invisible and entirely purposeful in the way that physical processes driven by fundamental laws are always purposeful, doing what the physics of temperature and pressure and the rotation of the Earth require them to do, arriving exactly when the physics say they will arrive, falling exactly where the geography of the subcontinent and the Himalayas and the Bay of Bengal direct them to fall. The rain outside was ocean water 6 weeks ago. It evaporated from a surface you will perhaps never see, on a warm afternoon somewhere over the Arabian Sea or the Bay of Bengal, and it has been traveling ever since. Carried northward in the atmosphere, lifted over the Western Ghats, or swept inland from the Bay of Bengal, condensed into cloud, and then released as rain on the landscape below. And now it is here, falling on the leaves and the soil and the rivers of the land, and eventually it will return to the ocean through the rivers that carry the monsoon's gift back to the sea, completing the cycle that the ocean began months ago and that the ocean will begin again next February, when the sun starts its northward journey and the water starts its patient evaporation and the whole ancient machine starts preparing itself for the next monsoon season. The cycle has no beginning that can be identified. It has no end that can be anticipated. It simply continues. Ocean to atmosphere, atmosphere to rain, rain to river, river to ocean, ocean to atmosphere, in the patient and circular and entirely self-sustaining way of natural systems that have found their equilibrium and are simply maintaining it, season after season, year after year, for as long as the sun continues to warm the ocean, and the ocean continues to evaporate, and the land continues to be warmer than the water in the months when the monsoon needs it to be warmer, which is to say, for a very long time yet. Allow your breathing to slow toward whatever pace feels most natural right now, the breath finding its own rhythm the way the monsoon finds its own rhythm. Not forced, not constructed, simply following the physics of the moment, the body doing what bodies do when the conditions are right and the signals of safety are present, and there is nothing required of the mind except to rest inside the knowledge that the ancient machine is running as it has always run in the quiet dark outside. The ocean is still warm tonight. The evaporation is still rising from its surface. The circulation is still carrying the moisture northward through the atmosphere. And somewhere in the dark, the rain is still falling on the land that the ocean has been feeding for 50 million years. Simply the ocean, doing what the ocean has always done, in the patient and unhurried way of something that has always known it has all the time in the world. The rain has been falling for some time now, not the first tentative drops of the monsoon's arrival that we rested in during our opening chapter, not the atmospheric physics of the monsoon's formation that we followed through the second chapter, not the patient evaporation of the Indian Ocean's warm surface that we traced through the third, but the rain itself, steady and continuous, and settled into its monsoon rhythm, falling on the landscape outside with a particular quality of a weather system that has committed to its work and will continue that work for hours and days without any particular urgency about when it might stop. The rain simply present in the way that the monsoon rain is present once the season has properly begun. As ambient and as unremarkable as the darkness of the night itself, simply there, falling in the warm and humid and quietly transformed atmosphere of the monsoon world. And within that rain and around it and because of it, something is happening in the living world outside that deserves a long and patient hour of quiet attention. Because the monsoon does not simply fall on a landscape, it transforms one. And the transformation is so complete and so rapid and so biologically extraordinary that the world that exists after several days of monsoon rain is genuinely and measurably different from the world that existed before the first drop fell. Not merely wetter, but more alive, more various, more occupied by creatures that were waiting in the soil and the roots and the bark and the dried mud, with a patience whose biological mechanism is as precisely calibrated as any instrument designed by human hands, waiting for exactly this signal, this specific combination of moisture and temperature, and the chemical changes that rain produces in the soil, to emerge and to live and to do the work of living that the dry months prevented. Begin with what happens beneath the surface, in the soil of the landscape that the monsoon is currently soaking, in the upper layers of earth that have been dry and baked, and largely biologically quiet through the weeks of the pre-monsoon season. There are organisms that have been waiting with a completeness of suspended animation that the word waiting barely does justice to. Organisms whose entire metabolism has slowed to a near complete halt in the absence of the moisture they require to function, their cellular processes reduced to the minimum necessary to maintain the structural integrity of the cells without actually carrying out any of the biochemical work that constitutes active life, existing in a state somewhere between life and its suspension that has no precise equivalent in the experience of any organism large enough to be visible to the naked eye. Bacteria and fungi in the soil shift from this dormant state to full metabolic activity within minutes of the first moisture arriving, their enzymes reactivating as the water molecules reach them and restore the aqueous environment that biochemistry requires, their populations beginning to expand almost immediately as the conditions that had been preventing reproduction are suddenly and completely removed. And this rapid and enormous expansion of microbial activity in the newly moistened soil produces a cascade of chemical changes in the soil environment that affects everything above the microbial level. The chemistry of the soil water changing, the gases released from the soil changing, the smell of the soil changing, in the way we explored in our first chapter, the whole character of the soil transforming from the chemically quiet state of the dry season to the chemically active and biologically productive state of the monsoon. The earthworms are among the first larger organisms to respond. Through the dry months, earthworms in the monsoon landscape retreat downward into the soil, descending to whatever depth the soil's moisture profile allows them to maintain the body hydration they require to survive, coiling into tight balls in the spaces between soil particles and entering a state of estivation, the warm season equivalent of hibernation, a metabolic slowdown triggered by heat and dryness rather than cold. The organism's body reducing its oxygen consumption and its water loss to the minimum that survival requires, and simply waiting in the dark of the deep soil, for conditions to change. When the rain arrives and the moisture front moves downward through the soil profile, the earthworms respond to its arrival with an immediacy that reflects the urgency of their situation. Estivation is energetically costly, and the worms that have survived the dry season have depleted their energy reserves significantly in the process, and the arrival of moisture means both the end of the conditions that forced estivation and the presence of the water that the worm needs to resume movement and feeding. And so the worms begin moving upward through the newly moistened soil toward the surface, with a speed and a directness of purpose that is unusual for organisms that spend their entire lives moving through a medium that resists movement. The surfacing of earthworms in the hours after the first monsoon rain is one of the monsoon landscape's most visible and most ecologically significant biological events. Thousands, and in some soil types, tens of thousands of worms per hectare emerging from the soil's surface simultaneously in response to the same moisture signal. Their bodies vulnerable on the surface, but their need to breathe overriding the vulnerability. The oxygen requirements of a fully active metabolism impossible to meet through a soil that is now so saturated with water that the air spaces between the particles have been filled. And so the worms come to the surface and breathe. And in coming to the surface, they become available to the birds and the frogs and the other animals that have been waiting for exactly this emergence. And the first day of the monsoon is, in this sense, a day of extraordinary abundance for everything that feeds on earthworms. A brief window of plenty that the predators of the monsoon landscape take full and immediate advantage of. And the frogs. The frogs deserve their own quiet and extended attention, because no group of animals in the monsoon landscape undergoes a transformation as complete or as dramatic or as biologically precise as the frogs. And no response to the monsoon's arrival is as immediate or as unmistakably connected to the first rain as the sound of the frogs beginning to call in the hours after the rain arrives. A sound so strongly associated with the monsoon in the cultures of South and Southeast Asia that the frog's call has become, in the literary and musical traditions of these regions, a primary symbol of the monsoon itself, the auditory signal of the season's arrival, in the same way that the smell of petrichor is the olfactory signal. Through the dry months, many species of frog in the monsoon landscape have been buried in the soil, sometimes at depths of a meter or more, their bodies encased in a cocoon of shed skin layers and dried mucus that reduces water loss from the skin to an almost negligible rate, their metabolism reduced to a fraction of its active season level, their bodies living on the fat reserves accumulated in the weeks before the dry season arrived, their entire existence for the duration of the dry months reduced to the maintenance of the physiological minimum, heartbeat, minimal cellular metabolism, the barest possible continuation of the processes that distinguish a living organism from a dead one. And then the rain arrives, and the moisture reaches the frog through the soil, and the cocoon softens and dissolves, and the frog's metabolism begins to accelerate from its dormant minimum toward its active season level, with a speed that has no mammalian equivalent, the entire physiological transition from dormancy to full activity occurring across hours rather than the days or weeks that a hibernating mammal requires to warm and wake and restore its metabolic functions to their waking level, and the frog emerges from the soil and begins almost immediately to call. The calling of the frogs in the first hours of the monsoon is not a gradual or tentative affair. It is a chorus, a full, immediate, overwhelming chorus of hundreds, and in some landscapes, thousands of individual frogs calling simultaneously from every waterlogged hollow and every temporary pool and every roadside ditch and every flooded field that the monsoon rain has created in the hours since its arrival, each species calling in its own frequency, and its own rhythm, but all of them calling at the same time. The combined acoustic output of the frog chorus, filling the night air with a sound so dense and so continuous and so omnidirectional that it becomes, like the rain itself, a quality of the atmosphere rather than a collection of individual sounds, a living, pulsing, biological component of the monsoon soundscape that the human ear cannot locate or separate into its individual elements, but receives as a whole, as a texture, as the unmistakable acoustic signature of the monsoon night. The urgency of the calling reflects the urgency of the frog's situation, because the temporary pools and the flooded fields and the waterlogged hollows created by the monsoon rain are exactly the breeding habitats that most monsoon frogs require. And those habitats will exist only for as long as the monsoon continues to maintain them with its rainfall. And so the pressure to find a mate and to breed and to deposit the eggs that will hatch and develop and metamorphose into juvenile frogs before the water dries up is an immediate and urgent pressure. The entire reproductive biology of these species calibrated for exactly this window of opportunity, and for nothing else. The frogs responding to the monsoon, not as a pleasant development in their environment, but as the single most important event in their annual reproductive calendar, the event whose arrival determines whether they will reproduce successfully this year or not at all. The plants respond more slowly, but no less completely. Through the dry months, many plants in the monsoon landscape have reduced their above-ground presence to the minimum, dropping their leaves, reducing their metabolic activity, directing what resources they have toward the maintenance of their root systems, rather than the growth of the above-ground structures that transpire water the plant cannot afford to lose. The whole visible body of the plant, shrinking and drying and retreating toward the soil in a way that can make a dry season monsoon landscape appear almost lifeless, the vegetation brown and sparse and desiccated in a way that gives no indication of the biological potential held in the root systems and the soil seed bank below. Within days of the first monsoon rain, this changes. The growth response of the monsoon vegetation to the arrival of rain is one of the fastest and most visually dramatic biological transformations that any landscape on Earth undergoes in response to any seasonal signal. The newly moistened soil triggering within the plant's root system the hormonal and enzymatic changes that shift the plant's resource allocation from maintenance mode toward growth mode, the stored sugars and the absorbed water moving from the roots upward into the stems and the developing leaf buds with a speed that produces visible change in the above-ground vegetation within 48 to 72 hours of the rain's arrival. Leaves that were not there 3 days ago are there now. Not fully developed leaves, not the broad, mature, photosynthetically active leaves that the plant will carry through the monsoon months, but the first, small and pale and tentative leaves of the new season's growth, unfolding from the buds that were waiting in the dormant stems through the dry months, each one a shade of green so vivid and so new that it reads, against the brown and desiccated background of the dry season vegetation, almost as a separate quality of light rather than simply a color, the particular luminous yellow-green of very new tropical foliage, catching whatever light the overcast monsoon sky provides and returning it with an intensity that the mature green of a fully developed canopy does not produce. The insects respond with the full complexity of a community that has been reduced by the dry season to its most drought-resistant forms and is now expanding rapidly back toward its monsoon season diversity and abundance. The mosquitoes breeding in every newly created pool of standing water with the speed that their short generation time allows. The beetles emerging from the dry litter and the bark where they overwintered. The termites launching their nuptial flights in the hours after the first rain. the winged reproductives that have been waiting inside the termite mounds through the dry months for exactly this weather signal emerging in their millions to fly and mate, and found new colonies in the newly moistened soil, filling the air above the monsoon landscape in the first nights of the season with such density of flying insects that the frogs and the birds and the bats that feed on them experience, in those first days, a brief and extraordinary abundance that the rest of the monsoon season will not quite match. The birds change, not their species. The same birds that were present through the dry months are present in the early monsoon, though some monsoon-specific migrants will arrive over the following weeks. But their behavior and their calls and the intensity and frequency of their singing, which increases dramatically in the days following the monsoon's arrival, in a way that reflects both the increased food availability that the monsoon creates and the hormonal responses to the changing photoperiod and the changed acoustic and olfactory environment that the rain produces. The Indian peacock, whose call is one of the most distinctive sounds of the Indian monsoon landscape, a loud and penetrating cry that carries considerable distance through the rain-heavy air, is perhaps the most culturally embedded avian symbol of the monsoon in the traditions of the subcontinent. Its call, so strongly associated with the arrival of the rain in the literature and the art and the folk traditions of India, that the peacock and the monsoon have become, in the cultural imagination of the region, almost inseparable. The bird's display and its calling seen for centuries as a celebration of and a response to the rain's arrival that mirrors, in the living world of the monsoon landscape, the celebration of human communities that have depended on that same rain for their own survival and prosperity. All of this, the earthworms surfacing and the frogs calling and the leaves unfolding and the insects emerging and the birds singing with renewed intensity, is happening simultaneously. In the hours and days after the monsoon arrives, across the entire extent of the monsoon landscape, across hundreds of millions of hectares of tropical and subtropical South and Southeast Asia, a continent-scale biological response to a continent-scale weather event that produces, in the aggregate, one of the most rapid and complete transformations of a biological landscape that occurs anywhere on Earth in response to any seasonal signal. The monsoon does not simply bring water. It brings life, in the most literal and immediate sense. The resumption of biological processes that were not occurring before the rain arrived, the activation of organisms that were not active, the growth of structures that did not exist, the calling of voices that were silent, the emergence of creatures that were hidden, all of it triggered by the same signal, the same first drop of rain on dry earth, the same geosmin rising from the soil, the same cooling of the air, the same shift in the atmospheric chemistry that every organism in the monsoon landscape has evolved across millions of years of coexistence with this most reliable of seasonal signals, to recognize and to respond to with the biological urgency that the brevity of the monsoon window requires. Lie very still now, in the quiet of this late hour, and simply allow the monsoon world to exist around you in the imagination. The frogs calling from every waterlogged hollow, the new leaves unfolding in the monsoon dark, the earthworms breathing the cool rain air at the surface of a soil that was hot and dry and biologically quiet only days ago. The whole landscape having shifted, almost overnight, from the patient waiting of the dry season to the urgent, joyful, biologically extravagant productivity of the monsoon months. This is what the rain does to the world. This is what 50 million years of monsoon has shaped the biology of an entire continent to do in response to the rain. Everything waiting, everything knowing, in the particular way that living things know the things their biology has been shaped by millions of years of natural selection to know, that the rain will come. And everything, when the rain comes, responding, as it has always responded, in the ancient and unhurried and entirely reliable way of a living world that has been organized around this same seasonal signal for longer than most of its constituent species have existed in their current forms. The frogs are still calling somewhere in the monsoon dark. The new leaves are still unfolding in the rain. The soil is still receiving the water it has been waiting months to receive. And you are still here, resting in the quiet knowledge of all of it, while the monsoon world goes about its ancient and joyful and entirely unhurried business in the dark outside. Simply the rain, and everything the rain makes possible. There is a sound outside tonight, not a dramatic sound, not a sound that demands attention or requires any particular response from the body receiving it, but a sound that has been arriving at the ears of sleeping creatures in monsoon landscapes for longer than ears existed in their current form. A sound so old and so consistently associated with the conditions of safety and sufficiency, and the relief of heat and dryness that the human nervous system has developed across its millions of years of being shaped by exactly the environment in which this sound was most reliably present, a response to it that operates below the threshold of any conscious processing, arriving not as a thought or a decision, but as a physical shift in the state of the body, a loosening, a settling, a gentle and complete permission to rest that no other sound in the natural world produces with quite the same reliability or quite the same depth. The sound is rain, and this chapter is going to stay with that sound for a long time. Not to explain it away, not to reduce it to its physics and its neuroscience in a way that makes it smaller or less beautiful than it is, but to understand it more fully, which is always, when the understanding is done carefully and slowly and with genuine attention, a way of making a beautiful thing more beautiful rather than less. Let us begin with what rain actually sounds like, before we follow the sound inward to what the brain and the body do with it, because the sound of rain is not a single sound but a family of sounds, each member of the family with its own specific character, determined by the physical interaction between a falling water droplet and the surface it strikes. And the full richness of the monsoon soundscape arises from the simultaneous occurrence of hundreds and thousands of these individual sounds, each one different, each one brief, each one overlapping with dozens of others in a texture so dense and so continuously varying that no single second of it is identical to any other second, and yet the whole produces an impression of consistency and steadiness and sameness that is itself one of the primary sources of its relaxing effect on the mind. A raindrop falling through still air achieves a terminal velocity determined by its size. Larger drops fall faster, smaller drops more slowly. The average monsoon raindrop reaching a terminal velocity of somewhere between 2 and 9 meters per second, depending on its diameter, which means that a large monsoon raindrop is arriving at the surface below it with a kinetic energy that, for its size, is quite considerable. And the sound that this energy produces on impact varies enormously depending on the physical properties of the surface that receives it. On dry, bare soil, the surface that the first monsoon rain encounters in the pre-monsoon landscape, the impact of a large raindrop produces a brief, muffled, slightly percussive sound that carries within it a quality of softness arising from the absorptive nature of the dry earth. The sound swallowed almost immediately by the soil itself, leaving behind more smell than sound. The geosmin aerosol rising from the impact point, carrying the sensory record of the drop's arrival further and longer than the acoustic record does. And the first minutes of rain on dry earth are, acoustically, among the quieter phases of the monsoon soundscape, the drops widely spaced and the sound of each one absorbed before the next arrives. But as the rain intensifies and the soil becomes saturated, the acoustic character of the rain on the earth changes. the absorptive capacity of the now wet soil is reduced. The drops that land on the thin film of water covering the saturated surface behave more like drops landing on a liquid surface than drops landing on an absorptive solid, and the sound shifts from the muffled percussive quality of rain on dry earth to the slightly brighter, slightly more resonant quality of rain on wet earth, each drop producing a small and brief but more acoustically present impact sound that accumulates across the thousands of drops falling per square meter per minute of steady monsoon rain into a continuous and layered acoustic texture. On the broad, horizontal leaves of the tropical plants of the monsoon understory, the large-leaved gingers and the banana plants, the taro, and the dozens of other species that have evolved specifically to make maximum use of the seasonal rainfall by presenting as much horizontal leaf surface to the falling rain as their structural resources allow. The sound of monsoon rain is entirely different from the sound of rain on soil, and it is this particular sound, the sound of rain on large tropical leaves, that is perhaps the most beautiful and the most acoustically complex element of the entire monsoon soundscape. When a large monsoon raindrop strikes the surface of a broad, slightly flexible leaf, several things happen simultaneously and in rapid sequence. The drop's kinetic energy is transferred to the leaf surface, which flexes slightly in response and then rebounds, the whole leaf vibrating briefly in a damped oscillation whose frequency is determined by the leaf's size and thickness and the tension in the leaf tissue. And this vibration produces a resonant sound whose pitch and duration are specific to that particular leaf, different from the sound produced by the same drop striking a leaf of slightly different size or age or species, so that a plant with dozens of leaves of varying sizes produces, in a steady rain, dozens of slightly different resonant notes struck in an order determined entirely by where the drops happen to fall. The largest leaves produce the lowest, most resonant notes, a deep, brief, hollow sound that carries a quality almost of percussion, almost of a gentle drum, the leaf vibrating at frequencies low enough that the sound has physical presence as well as acoustic presence, felt as well as heard, while the smaller leaves produce higher and briefer notes, and the dripping of water from the leaf margins where the accumulated drops spill over and fall to the leaves below produces its own secondary layer of sound, each drip from leaf to leaf carrying the acoustic record of the drop's previous impact, amplified and transformed by each subsequent surface it encounters. And on water, on the surface of the rivers and the pools and the flooded fields and the roadside ditches that the monsoon creates and fills and maintains, the sound of rain is different again. And it is this sound, perhaps more than any other element of the monsoon soundscape, that the human auditory system responds to with the most immediate and the most complete relaxation response. A response whose neurological basis has been studied carefully enough that researchers now understand, at least in broad outline, why the sound of rain on water produces in most human listeners a state of relaxation so reliable and so consistent across individuals and across cultures that it has been used deliberately as a sleep aid for as long as there have been people trying to fall asleep. When a raindrop strikes a calm water surface, it creates a brief, circular impact sound, followed immediately by the sound of the expanding ripple, and then, a fraction of a second later, the sound of the tiny air bubble that the impact traps beneath the surface, escaping upward through the water and releasing at the surface as a faint pop whose frequency is determined by the size of the bubble and that falls, for most monsoon-sized raindrops, in the range of 1 to 2 kilohertz, a frequency range that the human ear is particularly sensitive to, and that produces, in the auditory cortex, a response of alert but unfocused attention, the kind of attention that is present and engaged but not directed at any specific object or concern. The totality of these sounds, the muffled impacts on wet earth, the resonant notes of rain on tropical leaves, the brief pops and ripples of rain on water, the dripping from leaf to leaf, and from eave to puddle, and from branch to root, combines, in a steady monsoon rain, into the acoustic texture that the science of sound characterizes as pink noise, or 1/f noise. And it is in this characterization that the deepest explanation of the rain's relaxing effect on the human mind is found. Pink noise is a specific type of acoustic signal in which the intensity of the sound decreases proportionally as the frequency increases. In technical terms, a signal whose power spectral density is inversely proportional to the frequency, which means that the low-frequency components of the sound carry more energy than the high-frequency components, the bass tones richer than the treble tones, the whole spectrum of the sound weighted toward the lower end, in a way that gives pink noise its characteristic quality of warmth and fullness without harshness. This frequency relationship is found throughout the natural world, in the sound of wind through trees, and in the rhythmic lapping of ocean waves, and in the human heartbeat, and in the electrical activity of the resting brain itself, and the ubiquity of this relationship in natural acoustic environments has led researchers to hypothesize that the human auditory system has been specifically shaped by the millions of years during which human ears were developing in exactly these natural acoustic environments, to find the 1/f frequency relationship inherently and deeply reassuring, to receive the sound of pink noise as a signal that the environment producing it is natural and familiar and safe in the most fundamental sense that evolution has given to the concept of safety. The brain, during the transition from waking to sleep, produces slow waves of electrical activity whose frequency characteristics mirror those of pink noise. The delta and theta waves of light and deep sleep exhibiting the same inverse relationship between frequency and amplitude that characterizes the sound of rainfall, the brain's own resting rhythm and the rain's acoustic rhythm, speaking to each other in the same language, each one reinforcing in the other the state that both are expressing, the sound of the rain outside saying to the brain, in the language of frequency and amplitude, "You are in the right place, you are safe, this is the environment in which you were shaped to rest," and the brain responding to this message, not as a thought but as a physical shift, the slow waves deepening and widening as the rain continues and the brain moves further into the state that the rain is inviting it to enter. Studies examining the effect of pink noise on sleep quality have found consistent and significant improvements in both the speed of sleep onset and the depth and restorative quality of the sleep that follows, with particular improvements in the slow-wave deep sleep that is most associated with physical restoration and memory consolidation, and the researchers conducting these studies have attributed these improvements to the frequency matching effect between the pink noise stimulus and the brain's own slow-wave sleep rhythms, the external sound effectively entraining the brain's electrical activity toward the frequencies associated with deeper sleep, in the same way that a tuning fork can cause a nearby string tuned to the same frequency to begin vibrating in sympathy. The rain outside is tuning your brain, not metaphorically, in the literal, measurable, neurological sense of presenting your auditory cortex with a frequency pattern that your brain recognizes as the pattern it itself produces during deep sleep, and responding to this recognition by moving toward that state with a directness and a completeness that no manufactured sleep aid has yet managed to fully replicate. Because the rain is not simply producing the right frequencies, it is producing them in the context of all the other signals, the petrichor and the cool air and the parasympathetic shift and the ancient biological memory of rain as safety that have been accumulating since the first drop fell and that together constitute an environment so completely aligned with everything the human nervous system associates with rest, that resistance to sleep becomes, in such an environment, genuinely difficult. You are in exactly that environment right now. The rain is falling, the frequency is right. The brain knows what to do. Simply allow it. Somewhere below the rain, lower than the leaves and lower than the soil, and lower than the flooded fields and the roadside ditches and the temporary pools where the frogs are calling in the monsoon dark. The land is doing something that it does only in this season, only in response to exactly this amount of rainfall over exactly this duration. Something so slow that no single hour of observation would reveal it, but so consequential that the entire agricultural civilization of the subcontinent is organized around its annual occurrence. The rivers are rising, not dramatically, not in the sudden and catastrophic way that the word flood sometimes implies, though the monsoon does produce floods, and we will speak of those too, but in the first instance slowly, the way rivers respond to rain that is falling across their entire catchment area simultaneously, each tributary and each stream and each rivulet adding its modest contribution to the total flow, moving downstream toward the main river channel. The river responding to this distributed input, not with any sudden change, but with a gradual and patient increase in its volume and its velocity and its height above the dry season channel bed that is barely perceptible from hour to hour, but unmistakable from day to day, and extraordinary from week to week. A large monsoon river, the Ganges or the Brahmaputra or the Godavari, or any of the other great rivers of the Indian subcontinent, whose catchments cover hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of monsoon-receiving landscape, may carry, at its peak monsoon flow in July and August, 15 to 20 times the volume of water that it carried in the dry months of March and April, the difference so extreme that the river of the monsoon months and the river of the dry months are, in their visual and physical character, almost unrecognizable as the same watercourse. The dry season river, a modest and unhurried stream moving through a wide, sandy bed whose width reflects the space that the monsoon river requires, while the monsoon river fills that entire bed and sometimes overtops it, a moving body of water whose width and depth and power of flow belong to a different order of magnitude from anything the dry season produces. The Brahmaputra is perhaps the most dramatic example of this monsoon transformation among the world's major rivers. A river whose total annual discharge is among the largest of any river on Earth, and whose seasonal variation in flow is among the most extreme. The river rising by 10 to 12 meters above its dry season level at certain points in its course during the peak of the monsoon, an increase in height so large that the river's surface at peak monsoon is higher than the rooftops of buildings constructed on its banks at a distance calculated to be safe from its ordinary floods, the river having outgrown, in a matter of weeks, the spatial boundaries that seemed adequate to contain it in the months before the monsoon arrived. This rise is not simply the result of direct rainfall on the river's surface. The river's surface is a small and almost negligible fraction of its total catchment area, and direct rainfall on the river contributes only a tiny proportion of the total increase in flow, but is instead the accumulated result of rainfall across the entire catchment. The rain falling on the Himalayan slopes and the Tibetan Plateau and the Assam Valley, and the hills of Meghalaya and every other part of the catchment, finding its way into the river's tributaries through the processes of surface runoff and subsurface drainage and the discharge of groundwater that has been recharged by the rain, each pathway adding its contribution to the total flow at its own pace and over its own characteristic time scale. The Himalayan snowmelt adds another dimension to the monsoon rivers that is worth resting with. because the rivers of northern India receive their water from two sources simultaneously during the monsoon months. The monsoon rainfall itself, falling directly on the plains and the lower slopes, and the accelerated melting of the Himalayan snowpack that the warmer temperatures of the monsoon season drive, the snow that has accumulated on the Himalayan peaks through the winter months, releasing its stored water through the summer in a slow and continuous supplementary flow that keeps the rivers high, even during brief interruptions in the monsoon rainfall, and that extends the period of elevated river flow beyond the duration of the monsoon season itself. The rivers rising in the monsoon months are carrying not just water, but everything that water moving over and through the landscape at high velocity and high volume picks up and carries. Sediment eroded from the hillsides and the riverbeds, organic matter from the flooded vegetation, dissolved minerals leached from the soil by the percolating rainwater, the accumulated chemical richness of a landscape that has been biological active through the monsoon months, and that is releasing its biological products into the drainage system that the rivers constitute. This sediment load carried by the monsoon rivers is one of the most agriculturally significant substances in the world, because the rivers deposit this sediment as they slow and spread across the floodplains of the river valleys, and the soil that results from centuries and millennia of this annual deposition is among the most fertile agricultural land on the surface of the earth. The alluvial soils of the Gangetic Plain and the Indus Plain and the Brahmaputra Valley having been built grain by grain from the sediment of countless monsoon floods, each flood adding its thin layer of mineral-rich material to the accumulation that now supports the agriculture of hundreds of millions of people. The flood pulse. This is the ecological term for the annual rise and fall of water level in tropical river systems, and it is one of the most important and most productive ecological phenomena in the freshwater world. The pulse of the monsoon flood carrying the river's influence far beyond its normal channel and creating, for the weeks and months of the monsoon, a vast and extraordinarily productive mosaic of aquatic and semi-aquatic habitats that would not exist in the absence of the flood. Habitats whose brief seasonal existence supports some of the most diverse and productive freshwater biological communities on Earth. As the monsoon river rises and overtops its banks and spreads across the adjacent floodplain, it creates a temporary body of shallow, warm, food-rich water that is accessible to fish species that are physiologically and behaviorally adapted to exploit exactly this habitat for exactly this duration. Fish that move out of the main river channel as the flood water spreads across the floodplain, following the leading edge of the flood as it advances across the land, entering the flooded grasslands and the inundated forests and the waterlogged agricultural fields in search of the invertebrates and the plant material and the other fish that the floodwaters have concentrated and made accessible, feeding intensively through the monsoon months on the extraordinary biological productivity of the flood pulse and accumulating the fat reserves that will sustain them through the dry season when the river has retreated to its narrow channel and the floodplain has dried, and the food that was briefly so abundant is no longer available. The Gangetic river dolphin, one of the oldest and most evolutionarily distinct of the world's freshwater cetaceans, a creature whose lineage separated from the marine dolphins approximately 30 million years ago, when the ancestors of this species colonized the rivers of the Indian subcontinent and began the long, evolutionary journey of adaptation to a freshwater river environment, follows the flood pulse into the inundated flood forests each monsoon season, pursuing the fish that the floodwaters have driven from the main channel into the shallower and more complex habitat of the flooded vegetation, navigating through the submerged tree roots and the inundated grass stems by echolocation in the turbid, sediment-laden water of the monsoon flood, where visibility is effectively zero, and echolocation is the only sensory system capable of providing useful spatial information. The image of a river dolphin navigating through a flooded forest in the monsoon dark, moving through the submerged branches and the inundated grass stems with the ease and the precision that 30 million years of echolocation refinement has given it, is one of the monsoon landscape's most quietly extraordinary and most rarely witnessed biological realities, an animal whose evolutionary history stretches back to a time before the Himalayas reached their current height, pursuing a seasonal feeding strategy in a habitat created by the same monsoon system that the rising Himalayas helped to establish. The river dolphin and the monsoon and the Himalayan geology, all part of the same deep and entangled history of the subcontinent's physical and biological evolution. The rivers slow as they cross the flat alluvial plains of the lower catchments, the gradient diminishing and the velocity decreasing, and the sediment that the faster flowing upper river was capable of holding in suspension, beginning to settle from the water onto the channel bed and the floodplain surface, the river losing its suspended load gradually as it moves downstream and becoming, by the time it reaches the delta, a wide and slow and heavily loaded body of water that is still carrying enough sediment to build and rebuild the deltaic landforms at its mouth, with a speed and a productivity that makes active river deltas among the fastest changing landforms on the surface of the earth. The Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta, the largest river delta in the world, shared between Bangladesh and the Indian state of West Bengal, a vast and intricate landscape of distributary channels and islands and mangrove forests and agricultural land sitting only meters above sea level, has been built entirely from the sediment delivered by the monsoon rivers over the thousands of years since the current configuration of the drainage system was established, each monsoon season adding its contribution to the delta's growth in the same patient and unhurried way that each monsoon season adds its contribution to the recharge of the aquifers and the fertility of the agricultural soils and the biological productivity of the floodplain habitats. The river is always building something, even in the quietest and the slowest and the most unremarkable stretch of its course, even in the hours of the monsoon night when the river is simply flowing, simply carrying its water and its sediment downstream with the patient and continuous gravity-driven motion of water, finding its lowest available path. The river is doing the work that rivers have always done in the monsoon landscape, moving material from higher ground to lower ground, from the mountains to the plains to the delta to the sea, redistributing the mineral wealth of the Himalayas across the breadth of the subcontinent in the form of the fertile sediment that the monsoon floods deposit, sustaining with each annual cycle of rising and falling the agricultural abundance that has made the river valleys of the Indian subcontinent among the most continuously and densely inhabited places on Earth for the longest continuous spans of human history. The river does not know that it is doing this. It is simply water following gravity, doing what water has always done since the first rains fell on the first mountains and found their way downhill through the first channels in the first landscape that the rain had altered by falling on it. But the consequence of this simple and ancient behavior, accumulated across thousands of monsoon seasons, is the agricultural civilization of 1 billion people, the fertility of the plains that feed them, the forests and the wetlands, and the fisheries that sustain the biological diversity of the subcontinent alongside the human populations. All of it built on the patient annual labor of rivers doing nothing more than carrying monsoon water downhill to the sea. Allow your body to grow very heavy now. settling fully into the surface beneath you the way sediment settles through a slowing river, each particle finding its natural resting depth and holding it without effort, without intention, simply responding to the same gravity that has been organizing the monsoon's water since the first monsoon rain fell on the first Himalayan slopes 50 million years ago. The rivers are still rising somewhere in the monsoon dark. The tributaries are still carrying their contributions downstream to the main channels. The dolphins are still navigating through the flooded forests in the warm and turbid water of the flood pulse. And the sediment is still settling, grain by grain, onto the floodplain surface, where it has been settling for millennia, building the fertile soil that the next season's crops will grow in the patient and entirely unconscious way that the river has been building that soil since long before there were people to plant crops in it. The river continues, as it always continues, moving through the monsoon dark in the slow and steady and entirely unhurried way of water that has found its downhill path and is simply following it, carrying its monsoon load toward the sea with the patience of something that knows, in the only way that water can know anything, that the sea will still be there when it arrives, and you are still here, resting in the quiet of the monsoon night, while the rivers rise, and the frogs call, and the rain falls on the leaves in its ancient pink noise frequency, and the ocean continues its patient evaporation, and the atmosphere carries the moisture northward in the same slow and reliable circulation that it has maintained for 50 million years. Simply the river, simply the rain, simply the night. We have been following the monsoon through its sensory arrival and its atmospheric birth, and the vast oceanic engine that feeds it, and the biological world that wakes in response to it, and the acoustic science of why its sound carries the human nervous system so reliably toward rest. And now, in this quieter and deeper hour of the night, when the rain has been falling long enough that its sound has become the sound of the night itself rather than an addition to it, we are going to do something that the previous chapters have only gestured toward. We are going to follow the monsoon backward through time, not the months of a single year and not the decades of a single human memory, but the genuinely vast and genuinely humbling span of geological and evolutionary time in which the monsoon itself was shaped, the 50 million years across which the system we have been describing assembled itself from the raw materials of tectonic movement and atmospheric chemistry and oceanic circulation into the precise and reliable and biologically consequential machine that is falling as rain outside your window tonight. 50 million years is a number that requires the same kind of gentle handling that all very large numbers require if they are to do their proper work on the mind that receives them. Not grasped too tightly, not analyzed or calculated or compared with other large numbers in a way that turns the number into an arithmetic problem rather than an experience, but simply held loosely and without pressure as a felt quality rather than a counted quantity. The way you might hold a stone that is very old without knowing or needing to know precisely how old, simply feeling the weight and the smoothness of it, and allowing the knowledge of its age to settle into you as a quality of presence rather than a piece of information. 50 million years. The monsoon that is falling tonight has been falling in one form or another for 50 million years. The story of how it came to be falling with the particular character and the particular reliability and the particular geographic extent that it has today begins not with weather but with geology, with the slow and patient and almost incomprehensibly powerful movement of the tectonic plates that make up the outer shell of the Earth. Plates whose movement is driven by the convection of the hot mantle material beneath them, and that move at speeds measured in centimeters per year, with the kind of persistence that turns centimeters per year into thousands of kilometers across tens of millions of years, reshaping the surface of the planet in the process, in ways that alter not just the geography of the land, but the circulation of the oceans and the atmosphere above them, and therefore the climate of the entire Earth. Approximately 90 to 100 million years ago, the landmass that would eventually become the Indian subcontinent was located much further south than it is today. In the southern hemisphere, separated from the Asian landmass to its north by a body of water called the Tethys Sea, a warm and shallow tropical ocean whose existence is recorded today, not in any surviving body of water, but in the marine limestone and the ancient seafloor sediments that are now found at altitudes of 4 and 5 kilometers above sea level in the Himalayas. The compressed and folded and enormously elevated record of a seafloor that was, before the collision that would eventually destroy it, lying beneath warm tropical waters many thousands of meters below the sea surface. The Indian plate was moving northward, not quickly. The speed of the Indian plate's northward movement across the 50 million years of its journey from its Gondwanan origin to its eventual collision with the Asian plate ranged from approximately 15 to 20 centimeters per year during its most rapid phase, which is fast by tectonic standards, significantly faster than most other plate movements in the history of the Earth's surface. And this relatively rapid movement means that the geological events produced by the Indian plate's journey, the collision, the mountain building, the destruction of the Tethys Sea, unfolded across a shorter span of geological time than similar events driven by more slowly moving plates. Though shorter in this context still means tens of millions of years. The collision between the Indian plate and the Asian plate began approximately 50 to 55 million years ago, and it is this collision, the most consequential tectonic event in the recent geological history of the Earth's surface, that created the conditions necessary for the monsoon to exist in its current form, because the collision produced the Himalayas, and the Himalayas are not simply a backdrop to the monsoon story, but one of its primary causes. A mountain range whose existence and whose height and whose geographical orientation together create the atmospheric and geographical conditions that give the Indian monsoon its particular character and its extraordinary rainfall intensity. The Himalayas did not appear suddenly as the plates collided. They rose slowly over millions of years, as the ongoing compression between the two plates thickened the crust in the collision zone and pushed the thickened crust upward in the same way that two pieces of paper pushed together from opposite ends buckle upward in the middle. The gravitational potential energy created by the elevated topography, slowly coming into balance with the compressive force driving the thickening, the mountains reaching their current heights only gradually across the tens of millions of years of ongoing compression that has continued at a reduced rate to the present day, the Himalayan peaks still rising by a few millimeters per year as the Indian plate continues to move northward at its slower current rate, and the collision continues to drive crustal thickening in the mountain range above. The rising of the Himalayas transformed the monsoon in two distinct and mutually reinforcing ways, each one amplifying the other in the patient and interconnected way of large Earth system processes, whose components are linked through feedbacks that take millions of years to fully express. The first way is orographic. The Himalayas act as a physical barrier that prevents the moisture-laden southwest monsoon winds from continuing northward onto the Tibetan Plateau and into Central Asia, forcing those winds to rise over the mountain barrier instead. And the rising of warm, moist air over a mountain range is one of the most efficient rain-producing mechanisms in the atmosphere. The air cooling as it rises, and the cooling causing the water vapor to condense into cloud and fall as rain on the windward slopes of the mountains in the intense and sustained rainfall that makes the southern slopes of the Himalayas and the foothills of the monsoon belt among the wettest places on Earth. Without the Himalayan barrier, the monsoon winds would have continued northward into Central Asia, distributing their moisture more widely but less intensely, and the concentrated, intense, seasonally reliable rainfall that characterizes the Indian monsoon, and that has made the agricultural civilization of the subcontinent possible, would not exist in its current form. The monsoon rain would be spread thinner and further, the subcontinent receiving less of it and receiving it less reliably, the system without the topographic forcing of the mountains being weaker and more variable and less agriculturally dependable than the Himalaya-enhanced monsoon has proven to be across the millennia of human settlement in the region. The second way is thermal, and it operates on the largest possible scales of atmospheric dynamics. The Tibetan Plateau, which the rising of the Himalayas and the broader Himalayan orogeny has elevated to an average altitude of approximately 4.5 kilometers above sea level, making it the highest large plateau in the world, a landmass at altitude whose surface area is roughly 4 times that of France, acts as an elevated heat source in the summer months, absorbing solar radiation at high altitude and heating the air above it to temperatures significantly warmer than the air at the same altitude over the surrounding lowlands, creating a powerful elevated heat source that drives an intense low-pressure system over the plateau and strengthens the pressure gradient that draws the monsoon circulation northward from the Indian Ocean. In the absence of the Tibetan Plateau, if the Himalayan collision had not elevated this enormous area of continental crust to its current altitude, the thermal forcing of the monsoon circulation would be weaker, the pressure gradient between the ocean and the heated continent less steep, the winds that carry the oceanic moisture northward over the subcontinent less vigorous, and the monsoon that resulted would be a diminished and less reliable version of what the Himalayan orogeny has produced, the mountains having effectively amplified the monsoon system through both the orographic and the thermal mechanisms simultaneously, producing a weather system far more intense and far more reliably rainfall productive than the pre-Himalayan monsoon that preceded them. This pre-Himalayan monsoon, the monsoon that existed before the collision of the Indian and Asian plates, produced the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, was real and was a functioning weather system driven by the same fundamental thermodynamics of differential heating between land and ocean that drives the modern monsoon. But it was a weaker and less geographically confined system. The moisture delivered to the subcontinent less concentrated and less intense, and more evenly distributed across a wider geographical area, because the orographic barrier that now forces the monsoon winds to rise and release their moisture on the southern slopes of the Himalayas did not yet exist. The organisms that lived in the pre-Himalayan monsoon landscape experienced a climate that was recognizably monsoonal, wet seasons and dry seasons determined by the same seasonal reversal of the thermal gradient between land and ocean that drives the modern monsoon, but in which the rainfall was gentler and more widely distributed, and the ecological extremes between the wet and dry seasons were less severe than they have become as the Himalayas rose and the monsoon system they amplified developed its current intensity. The evolution of the biological communities of the Indian subcontinent across the 50 million years of the monsoon's intensification has been shaped by the progressive strengthening of these extremes, the organisms that have survived and thrived in the monsoon landscape across this span of geological time, being those that were capable of exploiting the extraordinary productivity of the wet season while enduring the physiological challenges of the dry season, the biological communities becoming progressively more specialized for this particular kind of seasonal extremity as the monsoon system delivering it became progressively more extreme. The frog that buries itself in the soil and enters estivation in the dry season and emerges within hours of the first monsoon rain to breed. The biological strategy we explored in our chapter on the living monsoon world is not simply a clever adaptation to the current monsoon climate, but the product of 50 million years of natural selection in an environment in which this strategy has been rewarded with reproductive success across every monsoon season since the strategy first appeared in the frog lineage. The behavior, refined by selection pressure across geological time into its current extraordinary precision, the timing of the emergence and the calling and the breeding calibrated to the monsoon signal with an exactness that reflects the length of time over which that calibration has been occurring. The ancient civilizations that grew up in the monsoon landscape were themselves shaped by the monsoon in ways that go beyond the simple dependence on monsoon rainfall for agricultural water, shaped in their calendars and their rituals and their architectural traditions and their economic systems and their mythological frameworks by the annual arrival and departure of a weather system whose reliability was the most important single fact of their physical environment. The Indus Valley civilization, one of the earliest and most sophisticated urban civilizations in human history, developing along the Indus River and its tributaries in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, approximately 4,500 to 5,000 years ago, built its cities and its agricultural systems in a landscape where the monsoon was the primary source of agricultural water, and the extraordinary sophistication of the Indus Valley city's water management infrastructure, the drainage systems and the wells and the reservoirs that archaeologists have documented at sites like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa reflects a civilization that had developed over the centuries of its urban development, an intimate and technically sophisticated relationship with the management of monsoon water in a semi-arid landscape. The Khmer Empire of mainland Southeast Asia, which built Angkor Wat and the other extraordinary temple complexes of the Angkor region in what is now Cambodia, between approximately the 9th and 15th centuries of the Common Era, organized its agricultural system around the management of the monsoon rainfall through an extensive network of reservoirs and canals and water distribution, systems that allowed the empire to store the monsoon's abundant wet season rainfall and distribute it through the dry season for the irrigation of the rice paddies that fed the Khmer population. The hydraulic engineering of the Khmer Empire, representing perhaps the most sophisticated pre-industrial system of monsoon water management in all of human history. The monsoon has been falling on these civilizations and their predecessors and the landscapes that preceded both for longer than any of them has existed, longer than the first human settlements in the monsoon region, longer than the first domestication of the rice and the wheat and the millet that became the agricultural foundations of the subcontinent's civilizations, longer than the first human presence in the monsoon region in any form, the rain falling in the same seasonal pattern on landscapes occupied by the ancestors of the organisms currently living in the monsoon world, shaping those organisms' biology and those landscapes' ecology across the deep time of the monsoon's own history. 50 million years of rain, falling on 50 million years of changing landscapes, on landscapes occupied successively by organisms that no longer exist, and organisms that exist today, and organisms that had not yet evolved into their current forms, on landscapes crossed by rivers that have changed their courses and sea levels, that have risen and fallen, and mountain ranges that have been rising slowly across the entire duration of the monsoon's existence. All of it shaped and reshaped and shaped again by the same ancient atmospheric machine, the same differential heating of land and ocean, the same southwest winds carrying the same oceanic moisture northward from the same Indian Ocean that has been the monsoon's engine since the beginning. The rain falling outside tonight is not a new phenomenon. It is the most recent instance of something that has been happening continuously, season after season, year after year, across a span of geological time so vast that the entire history of the human species occupies less than 0.1% of it. A weather system older than the grasslands of Africa, where our ancestors evolved, older than the first hominids, older than most of the species currently alive on Earth, older than many of the mountain ranges visible from the monsoon landscape, older than almost anything in the biological or geological world whose history can be usefully compared to the monsoons without the comparison, simply dissolving into numbers too large to hold. And it will continue. The Indian plate is still moving northward, still compressing the Himalayan crust, still maintaining the topographic barrier and the elevated plateau that amplify the monsoon circulation to its current intensity. And the Indian Ocean is still warm and still evaporating and still loading the atmosphere with the moisture that the monsoon will deliver to the land next year and the year after and the year after. That, for as long as the physics of differential heating continue to operate, and the sun continues to rise each spring over a subcontinent that warms faster than the ocean to its south, which is to say, for a very long time, the monsoon is not fragile. It is one of the most robust and self-sustaining large-scale atmospheric phenomena on the surface of this planet, maintained by physical processes, whose existence depends only on the continued operation of the sun, and the continued existence of the ocean, and the continued presence of the land, whose differential heating drives the circulation, none of which are in any danger of ceasing within any time frame that is meaningful to any organism alive on Earth tonight. The monsoon will be here next year. It will be here in 1,000 years. It will be here in 1,000,000 years, in some form recognizable as the descendant of the same system operating today, shaped by whatever geological and climatic changes those 1,000,000 years produce, but driven by the same fundamental physics that has driven it for the 50 million years already elapsed. And it is here tonight, falling outside in the dark, as patient and as reliable and as ancient as anything you will ever directly experience in the natural world. The most recent chapter of a story so long that the beginning of it is older than the Himalayas that amplify it. The rain falling in the same monsoon season that has fallen on every monsoon season before it, and that will fall on every monsoon season after it, for as long as there is a subcontinent warm enough, and an ocean wet enough, and a sun strong enough to set the whole ancient machine running again each June. Rest inside that knowledge now, not trying to hold the 50 million years clearly, because no mind holds 50 million years clearly, but simply allowing the quality of that antiquity to rest in the body, alongside everything else that the monsoon night has been delivering. The petrichor and the pink noise and the cool air and the parasympathetic shift, and the frogs calling from the flooded hollows and the rivers rising in the dark. All of it ancient, all of it continuous, all of it falling on this particular night as it has fallen on every monsoon night before it. The rain is very old, and it is here, right now, falling outside in the patient and unhurried and entirely reliable way that it has always fallen. Simply the oldest rain in the world, falling on the newest night. Everything that arrives, eventually, begins to leave. Not abruptly, and not in the way of something that has decided to go, because the monsoon does not decide anything, and does not go in any deliberate or directional sense, but simply withdraws. Slowly and in the same patient and unhurried manner in which it arrived, following the physics of its own seasonal logic in reverse. The thermal gradient that drove its onset weakening as the autumn approaches and the solar heating of the subcontinent decreases, and the differential between the land temperature and the ocean temperature narrows toward the point at which it can no longer sustain the pressure gradient that has been drawing the oceanic air northward across the subcontinent since June. The withdrawal of the monsoon is called the monsoon's retreat, and it is, in the meteorological literature and in the lived experience of the people and the landscapes that the monsoon sustains, among the most carefully observed and the most emotionally complex of the monsoon's seasonal transitions, carrying within it a mixture of feelings whose character varies across the different communities and the different ecologies and the different agricultural systems of the monsoon world. Relief in some regions where the rainfall has been excessive and the flooding has been severe, anxiety in others where the rainfall has been insufficient, and the retreat of the monsoon before the soil moisture is fully recharged threatens the agricultural season ahead, and in many communities a quality of melancholy whose depth reflects the degree to which the monsoon has come to be understood across generations of living with it, as something more than weather, a presence, a companion, a reliable annual visitor whose departure marks the end of one kind of year and the beginning of another. The retreat follows a path that mirrors the advance, but in reverse and at a somewhat slower pace. The monsoon withdrawing from the northwestern regions of the subcontinent first, in early September, and retreating southward and eastward across the weeks that follow. Leaving each region, it departs as a slightly different place than it was before the monsoon arrived. Wetter in the most literal sense, the soil moisture profile fully recharged, the rivers still running at elevated flows, the groundwater table risen to its seasonal maximum, the landscape saturated with a quantity of water whose existence will sustain the post-monsoon agriculture, and the dry season river flows, and the well water of the villages for the months ahead. But the departure of the monsoon from the northwest does not mean the end of rain in those regions. The monsoon's retreat is accompanied, in the northeast of the subcontinent and in the Bay of Bengal region, by the northeast monsoon, a less dramatic and less rainfall productive, but nonetheless significant seasonal wind reversal that brings winter rainfall to the southeastern coastal regions of India and to Sri Lanka between October and December, a secondary monsoon circulation that sustains the agricultural seasons of those regions through the months when the rest of the subcontinent is experiencing its dry post-monsoon winter. The Indian Ocean contributing to the annual rainfall of the subcontinent not once but twice, from different directions, in different seasons, with different but complementary effects on the agricultural calendar of the regions they serve. Watch the sky in the days after the monsoon has retreated from a particular location, and you will notice something about the light. The quality of light in the post-monsoon period is unlike the quality of light at any other time of year, because the weeks of monsoon rainfall have washed the dust and the aerosols and the haze particles from the atmosphere with an efficiency that no dry season wind could match, leaving the post-monsoon air so clear and so transparent that the sky achieves a depth and a blue that the pre-monsoon sky, heavy with dust and aerosol and the rising particles of the heated land surface, could never produce. The post-monsoon sky is the clearest sky of the year across most of the monsoon region. A deep, luminous, unobstructed blue that makes distant features of the landscape appear closer and more sharply defined than they do at any other season. The washed and clarified atmosphere transmitting the light of the autumn sun with a directness and a purity that the dust-laden pre-monsoon atmosphere and the cloud-filled monsoon atmosphere both prevent. And the experience of moving through this clarified post-monsoon light in the weeks after the rain has ended is one that people who know the monsoon landscape describe consistently as among the most beautiful visual experiences the monsoon year provides. The clarified air revealing the landscape as if newly made, as if the rain has not only watered the land, but cleaned the entire optical path between the eye and the horizon. The soil, in the weeks after the monsoon's departure, still holds the memory of the rain. Not simply as moisture, though the moisture is there, present in the soil profile to depths and in quantities that will take months of dry weather to fully deplete, but as a biological memory, the microbial communities that the rain reactivated, the fungal networks that the moisture allowed to extend and connect, the seed banks that the rain triggered into germination. All of these biological processes set in motion by the monsoon's arrival and continuing through its departure and into the post-monsoon weeks on the momentum of what the rain began. The soil biologically active in the weeks after the rain ends in ways that it was not before the rain arrived. The monsoon's biological legacy persisting in the soil long after its meteorological presence has withdrawn northward toward its eventual disappearance into the sea. The post-monsoon landscape carries visible signs of this biological persistence. The new growth triggered by the monsoon rainfall still present in the vegetation, the leaves that unfolded in the first days of the monsoon now fully developed and photosynthetically productive, the annuals that germinated in the monsoon soil now flowering and setting seed before the dry season removes the moisture they require, the perennials that invested the monsoon's water in root growth, and the accumulation of underground reserves, now drawing on those reserves as the soil surface dries and the air loses its monsoon humidity, the whole vegetation of the landscape, conducting the final business of the growing season in the warm and still and clarified air of the monsoon, weeks before the dry season arrives in earnest, and the long, patient waiting of the pre-monsoon period begins again. The rivers take longer to return to their dry season levels than the rain takes to withdraw, because the rivers are sustained not only by the direct input of rainfall into their catchments, but by the slow drainage of the groundwater that the monsoon has recharged. The water that seeped through the soil during the monsoon months and accumulated in the aquifers of the catchment, moving slowly and continuously through the saturated soil and rock toward the river channels that it will eventually reach and enter, adding its flow to the river's volume for weeks and months after the monsoon rainfall itself has ended. This groundwater contribution to post-monsoon river flow is one of the most important and most underappreciated aspects of the monsoon's hydrological legacy, because it means that the rivers of the monsoon region continue to flow at elevated levels and to sustain the aquatic communities and the agricultural water withdrawals and the household water supplies that depend on them. For months after the rain has stopped, the recharge of the aquifers during the monsoon, acting as a buffer between the wet season's abundance and the dry season's scarcity, releasing the stored water slowly and continuously through the months of the dry season in the patient way of a body of saturated rock, releasing its stored water to the pull of gravity and the hydraulic gradient toward the river channels. The departure of the monsoon is not simply a meteorological transition. It is the end of the most productive months of the hydrological year for the entire subcontinent. the closing of the window, during which the annual recharge of the soil moisture and the groundwater and the rivers and the reservoirs occurs. The window on whose duration and whose rainfall intensity, the water availability of the entire subcontinent for the following 11 months depends. And the question of whether that window has delivered enough rainfall in the right distribution across the right regions is a question whose answer, determined in the weeks after the monsoon's departure, when the soil moisture deficit and the reservoir levels and the river flows can be assessed, will determine the agricultural fortune and the water security of hundreds of millions of people for the year ahead. And then the dry season begins, slowly and without announcement, the same way the monsoon began, the sky clearing of its monsoon cloud, the air losing its monsoon humidity, the temperatures beginning their gradual seasonal shift, the vegetation beginning its gradual seasonal retreat from the biological exuberance of the monsoon months toward the patient and economical strategies of the dry season. And the landscape, which has been transformed so completely by the arrival of the monsoon 6 months earlier, begins its equally complete transformation back toward the dry season state that preceded the monsoon's arrival. The soil will dry, the rivers will fall, the vegetation will shed its leaves and reduce its above-ground biomass, and direct its remaining resources downward into the roots and the underground reserves that will carry it through the dry months ahead. The frogs will descend back into the soil and begin their estivation, coating their bodies in the mucus and the shed skin layers that will reduce their water loss to a minimum and allow them to survive the dry months in the same patient, suspended state in which they have survived every dry season of their species' history. And everything will wait, as it has always waited, in the patient and entirely confident way of organisms that have been doing this, waiting for millions of years. And that know, in the only way that living things know the things their biology has been, shaped by natural selection to know that the waiting will end, that the rain will come again, that the monsoon will arrive next June, as it has arrived every June for 50 million years, and that the waiting is not a deprivation, but simply the other half of the annual cycle, the necessary complement to the monsoon's abundance, the dry silence that makes the rain's arrival, when it comes, the most reliably anticipated and the most deeply felt seasonal event in the life of the landscape. But that waiting is not tonight. Tonight the rain is still here. The monsoon has not yet withdrawn, or if it has, you can remember the rain, and the memory of rain on a quiet night carries its own particular quality of comfort that is not so different from the comfort of rain actually falling, the same warmth and the same safety and the same ancient permission to rest that the actual rain provides, simply held in the mind rather than received through the ears and the skin and the nose. And whether the rain is falling right now outside your window, or is held in your memory, or is imagined in the space of this long and quiet night, the monsoon is present in this moment in the most important sense, not as weather but as understanding, as the slowly accumulated knowledge of what the rain is and where it comes from and how long it has been coming, and what it does to the world it falls on, and how the world that receives it is changed by the receiving. The monsoon will return, it always returns, in the same season, following the same physics, driven by the same differential heating of the same land and the same ocean, delivering the same ancient water from the same ancient sea, falling on a landscape that has been waiting for it with the same patient and entirely confident expectation that it has always brought to the waiting. The monsoon knows the way. It has been making this journey for 50 million years. It does not get lost. Rest here now, in the quiet that the monsoon is leaving behind it as it withdraws from the season and from the hour, in the particular stillness of a post-rain night when the air is washed and clarified, and the soil is full of water, and the rivers are still running high, and the frogs are still calling from the flooded hollows, and the new leaves are still fresh and vivid on the monsoon vegetation, and everything in the landscape carries the biological memory and the physical presence of all the rain that has fallen. The rains are leaving, but they have left behind everything they came to give: the recharged soil, the risen rivers, the woken frogs, the new leaves, the reseeded fields, the recharged aquifers that will sustain the dry months ahead, and the knowledge, deep and ancient and entirely reliable, that the rains will come again, as they always come again. We have traveled a long way together tonight, through the first drop and the petrichor and the pink noise of the rain on leaves and the parasympathetic shift of a body receiving the signal it has waited for, through the thermodynamic machine of the monsoon's annual birth and the vast oceanic engine of the Indian Ocean loading the atmosphere with the moisture that became the rain, through the biological world that woke in the first hours of the monsoon and the extraordinary acoustics of the rain on every surface it touches, through the rivers rising in the monsoon dark and the deep history of 50 million years of rain falling on 50 million years of changing landscapes, through the slow and patient withdrawal of the monsoon from the season and the landscape that it leaves behind. And now we are at the end of the journey, which is also the beginning of the sleep. And there is nothing left to say except the simplest and the most immediate and the most present thing, which is that the rain is still here, or the rain is in your memory, or the rain is in your imagination, which is a kind of memory of something that has not happened yet, but that the body already knows the feeling of, because the body has been receiving the monsoon signals since before it knew what to call them, and the feeling of the monsoon rain is as available to the body in the imagination as it is in direct sensory experience. The nervous system responding to the imagined rain with the same parasympathetic shift, the same slowing of the heart, the same loosening of the held muscles, the same permission to rest that the actual rain provides. Simply the rain, the sound of it on the leaves outside, or the memory of that sound, settling into the ears and moving through the auditory cortex in its ancient 1/f frequency pattern, meeting the slow waves of the resting brain in the resonance that the neuroscience of sleep calls entrainment, and that the body simply calls coming home. Simply the rain, the smell of it in the air, or the memory of that smell, the geosmin that the soil bacteria released when the first drops fell, arriving through the nose and reaching the olfactory cortex and moving from there into the oldest layers of the brain that process the signals of the environment and registering there as it has always registered: safety, water, relief, the end of the waiting, the beginning of the rest. Simply the rain, the coolness of the monsoon air, or the memory of that coolness, the temperature drop that the arriving moisture produces settling against the skin and telling the thermoregulatory systems of the body that the conditions are right for sleep, that the temperature is lower than the waking day required, and that the body's own core temperature can begin its nightly descent toward the slightly cooler internal temperature that deep sleep requires. The cool air of the monsoon night and the cooling of sleep working together in the way that they have always worked together in every monsoon night in the history of the organisms that sleep in. Monsoon landscapes, simply the rain falling on the leaves one by one, each drop landing on its own particular leaf surface and producing its own particular brief resonance, and joining the continuous and layered acoustic texture of the monsoon soundscape that the ears have been receiving since the first chapter, and that has been doing its quiet neurological work throughout the entire journey of this long and unhurried night. The rain does not know you are listening to it. It is simply falling, in the patient and entirely automatic way of water, following gravity through the air from the cloud, where it condensed to the surface, where it will land, and eventually make its way back to the ocean, from which it evaporated months ago, doing what it has always done, carrying out the ancient and circular journey of the water cycle in the same unhurried way that it has always carried it out, from ocean to atmosphere to cloud to rain to river to ocean again, the cycle with no beginning and no end, simply continuing season after season and year after year, in the patient and self-sustaining way of something that has found its own equilibrium and needs nothing from the world outside itself to maintain it. The rain and you resting here, and the night, which is the same night that has been deepening through all the chapters of this long journey, the darkness outside unchanged from the darkness of the first chapter, except that the rain has been falling through it, and the frogs have been calling into it, and the rivers have been rising within it, and the soil has been absorbing it, and the leaves have been unfolding in it, the night doing what nights do, while the rain does what rain does, and the sleeping world does what sleeping worlds do. Allow your breathing to find its own pace now, the breath that the body would breathe if you simply stopped asking anything of it, and let it breathe as it would in the deepest and most undisturbed sleep, slow and deep and entirely unconscious. The diaphragm dropping and rising in its own rhythm without any instruction, the air moving in and out through the night in the same unhurried exchange that it has been making since the first breath you ever drew. The monsoon is doing the same thing in its own vast and atmospheric way, breathing the ocean's water up into the sky and releasing it as rain on the land in the same slow and continuous and entirely patient respiratory motion of a system that has been breathing in this way for 50 million years, and that has, by this point in its ancient history, no need to hurry and no reason to change and no concern for the particular night it is breathing through, or the particular sleeping creatures that are receiving its exhalation as rain on their rooftops and their leaves and their upturned faces. The rain continues, as it always continues, outside, in the dark, in the warm and humid and quietly extraordinary atmosphere of the monsoon night, and you are here, very nearly somewhere else, very nearly in the place that the rain has been leading you toward through all the long and patient hours of this night. The place where the sound of the rain is simply the sound of the night, where the petrichor is simply the smell of the air, where the cool monsoon temperature is simply the temperature of the body at rest, where the parasympathetic quiet is simply the ordinary quiet of a nervous system that has received all the signals it requires and has responded to all of them and has nothing left to do except allow the sleep that has been approaching through the entire journey of this night to complete its own unhurried arrival. The rain is still falling. It will still be falling when you wake, or it will have stopped, and the morning will be clear and washed and luminous in the particular post-rain way of monsoon mornings, the air clarified by the night's rainfall and the light arriving through that clarified air with a quality of freshness that no pre-rain morning can quite match. The world looking as though the rain has not only watered it but remade it, which in a sense it has, the world genuinely different after a monsoon rain from what it was before, the soil wetter and the rivers higher and the frogs calling and the leaves newer and the aquifers fuller and everything that was waiting for the rain now in the first hours of receiving it. But that morning is not yet. Right now there is only the rain and the night, and the ancient and reliable and entirely patient system that has been delivering this same rain to this same landscape in this same season for 50 million years. And you, here, resting. The rain knows the way it always has, simply the rain.